Thank you. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us. It's great to be back in Abu Dhabi. I'm honored to be joined for this session by Herbie Hancock. Absolutely no introduction necessary. And to be honest, if I was to give the full and proper Herbie intro, we'd use up pretty much all of our time. The title for our talk is Jazz, Humanity and Beyond. Some very big themes there. We can't promise to cover everything, but we'll aim jazz style to hit some notes that resonate. If Herbie needs no introduction, I believe maybe I do. My day job is CEO of the Financial Times, where I've spent the past 4 decades as a reporter, foreign correspondent, and then CEO. Away from the day job and my family, music and jazz are my passion. And that's where I turn when I need perspective, which frankly one needs a lot in today's world of news. And one of my inspirations and sources of perspective has been the work of this man. You will all know what I mean when I talk about musical epiphanies, those moments when a composition connects so strongly. Well, taking Maiden Voyage from its beautiful Blue Note sleeve and playing it on my turntable sometime, I guess, in the 70s when I was starting to get into music was one of those moments for me. And Herbie, the more I've seen and heard you in your music, in interviews, in your work with UNESCO and the Herbie Hancock Institute, that inspiration and admiration has grown. So when I was offered this opportunity, I couldn't believe my good fortune. Timing is everything, as they say, and the timing for our conversation is very relevant given the topics we want to talk about. There's so much change and upheaval going on right now in society and technology, so many challenges for humanity. So we're going to get to music in just a few moments, but maybe we can start with some big picture themes at the heart of this summit and International Jazz Day: global connections, community, and humanity. We have here today guests and delegates from all over. You, Herbie, are a true global citizen in your music and your educational work. The FT has readers in all 192 of the world's countries, reflecting our belief in the importance of international community and connections. But recently it feels like we're kind of spinning into reverse. Nationalism is back, barriers and borders are on the rise, politics is polarized, conflict is in the march. So we'll get to the good news in a minute, but how do you feel about the state of the world right now, and how's humanity doing?
Things are difficult pretty much all over the world. You know, a lot of things are changing. But I have a feeling that much of this change is related to the age that we're living in now. We're living in a technological age. And when we think about ages from the past, they've usually been about 100 years. This one is going to be 200 or 300 years. We don't really know, and it keeps getting faster and faster and faster, you know, with the advent of AI and so many things that weren't even possible before, things that we hadn't thought about before. So many things are developing in that regard. And so it just changes the trajectory of things. And with change, there often is the other end of it, which is problems and issues. You know, I was just thinking about when COVID came in. That was extreme change. But it united people, which is amazing. And I'm hoping that this change will help unite people again. You know, even though we have problems in the world, you know, we may think there are millions and millions of families in the world. No, there's only one. And it's all of us. We're all the same family. We all came from the same root, right? You know, human beings came from Africa. You know, science has already proven that. And then we moved to various areas of the world. But I'm a Buddhist, and I've been practicing Buddhism now for more than 50 years. And we have this phrase called changing poison into medicine. So I'm hoping that one of the things that we talk about, what we're the worst examples of, is ethics. You know, we talk about it, but we're terrible at that, right? I'm hoping that some of these issues will bring about an understanding of ethics, because it might come from AI. They may be teaching us how to become better examples of ethics.
I'll come back to AI in some detail later, because it is, as you say, changing everything. But
Okay.
you talked about the unity that, in a sense, we saw a bit around the COVID time. But right now, it feels like the divisions are deeper than the unity. So I was looking, I saw a quote from your old band partner, Wayne Shorter, the other day. He said, jazz means teamwork, a willingness to say something, and also to listen. And I'm just wondering, given all of these divisions and polarization, whether we've stopped really listening to each other. And I wonder whether, you talked about technology and the importance, whether social media has a role in this. People get lost in echo chambers. They just hear opinions that reinforce bias. In theory, social media should be a way of connecting and sharing, but maybe it's polarizing. What's your view on whether people are listening to each other and why that is?
Yeah. Social media is it's a blessing. It's also a problem, you know. And I'm not really I have not been well, look at my age, right? It's come up toward the latter part of my age, and it's not easy for me to get into it like my daughter, and now my grandson, who is now 4 years old. I mean, he already has his iPad, and he knows how to manipulate everything on it. So it's really something for his age. But we always manage to get through these issues, and I really believe in humanity. We'll be able to get through them. And jazz is going to play a very important part of all of these problems, because we're finding out because of not just because of Jazz Day itself, but just the ethics that are in the performance of jazz, that we perform very often with people that we don't like. Right?
Name some names.
But as soon as we start playing, that kind of goes out the window, because once the music starts, it becomes something that it becomes a bigger world than this combative one. And it's something that we share. It's always about that, you know. It's a big driving force for me.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about that, because the broad question is, can jazz, as an art form and with its roots and values, provide guidance or lessons for humanity? In your book, Possibilities, you wrote, in jazz we share, we listen to each other, we respect each other, we're creating in the moment. At our best, we're non-judgmental. So talk a little bit about the jazz process and how that kind of leads to better ethics, I guess, to your earlier point. What is it about music, to a certain extent, is in general a unifying force. It crosses borders, it's everywhere, but I think jazz in particular has special features that make it kind of provide lessons for better ethics. Maybe you could improvise a bit on that.
Well, I would say, this just popped into my mind. For me, I have a problem with when people ask me, what's your favorite, whatever the heck it is, right? Because I don't think hierarchically. because that usually means something is better than something else. Um, I don't think of music like that because, and as a matter of fact, human beings, the same thing. There aren't people that are better than other people. All of us are bad, and all of us are good, right? But even in your own family, does everybody like everybody in their own family?
No comment.
You just laughed, didn't you? Every night when I perform, I say the same thing to the audiences, and they always laugh, right? But what do? You try to help whoever it is, if it's your brother or your sister, you try to help them because they're in your family. So we should look at each other the same way. And in jazz, it's a demonstration of that. It becomes one family.
Jazz and peace. So Danilo Perez was saying you can be angry, but you ain't going to be angry for long once you start playing.
Yeah.
Jazz is a cultural passport of tolerance, of freedom. I read that and I thought it was a very good quote, and then I was trying to picture an angry Herbie, and I kind of struggled actually. Do you ever get angry? And when was the last time you were angry?
At my wife. She's German, Germans are like strict, and she's a very strong woman too. Just like my mother, she was a very strong. We had a kind of matriarchal family. My father was like, "Yes, dear," and I used to get mad at my father for like, why don't you stand up for yourself? You know who says yes, dear now? It works better. And we've been married a very, very long time. That's the secret, guys.
Okay. I'm going to take a
Or
note.
whomever your spouses are,
I think you
Right.
struck a chord there. So jazz, of course, is deeply rooted in the US. Wynton Marsalis described jazz as the most American of art forms, the distillation of the American spirit. But of course, jazz is now absolutely everywhere. I've just been touring Japan. I was in China. And jazz.
May I interrupt you
Of
for a
course,
second?
yeah.
It's a demonstration of the human spirit.
Mm.
That's what I believe.
Mm.
Maybe it was born in America,
Yeah.
but it was kind of, if you have dinner, right, there's a lot of things on your plate, So it's one of the things on the plate that America kind of brought. But all of it gets eaten, right? If you just have one thing, that would be, imagine just having to eat one thing all the time. Might be boring, right? It's nice to have a lot of different things, sauces and,
And on this theme of connections and collaboration and the international dimension, the different flavors of food on the plate, just tell us a little bit how the work of the Herbie Hancock Institute creates and develops these connections. What does it actually do? What's the goal and the mission and the purpose, and how's it going?
Well, because we think of the world really as being one, that we all share this planet that we love. It's the only one that we can live on at this point. We haven't been to Mars yet. And it's becoming increasingly difficult nowadays. But in order to be able to make this planet become what we really want it to be, we all have to come together as a family, And jazz, I think, is an important element in making that happen. And I'm learning that from, International Jazz Day and other kind of joining together of, with UNESCO, for example, to make International Jazz Day. And so many of the things that we're doing at the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz are trying to, help be a part of the glue that helps to bind together a universal force for the future. I mean, we see movies about where there's you know, a kind of global committee for in the future for humanity. How are we going to build that kind of thing? We have to, kind of have that as a goal in our heads and in our hearts. But the only thing that's going to make that happen is for us to be together as a family. And in my case, jazz I think will be an important element, and just the spirit of it, whether it's in jazz itself. But improvisation is something that human beings do all the time, right? Conversation is improvisation. So all of you are jazz musicians. As soon as you open your mouth and communicate, it's about that. Sharing ideas. Even arguments. Sharing of ideas. So I'm looking forward to a future where people are able to develop our self-support, where there is a global community of human beings, so that we can look forward to moving beyond this planet, into the stars.
Just on that point about improvisation, is that something you can learn, or is it just innate? We talked earlier about me being...
Everybody already improvises already. They've already learned it, But you mean specifically improvisation on an instrument?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. How did you learn to improvise?
Well, I listened to a lot of records, and the first lesson I got was from the guy that really turned me on to jazz, and it was a classmate of mine, and I knew he played piano, but I didn't know he knew how to improvise, and I started out playing piano, and studying classical music. I didn't know how to improvise. When I saw a guy my age improvising, and he was a friend of mine, he wasn't a close friend of mine, but he soon became a very close friend of mine. So it's something that is innate in human beings, but we learn from each other, and it's something that we're all capable of doing. Maybe everybody's not going to become a master, but you don't have to be a master. You can still have fun playing music, and it's very satisfying for people, even though they haven't mastered it.
In some
So
respects,
if you haven't tried it, you might as well try it at some point.
we'll have a little session later, a little jam session with the audience.
Yeah.
In some respects, you're an unusual combination of talents, because obviously you're a master improviser and very innovative, but one of the things that struck me when I was reading your book was back in the day, when you were going for that competition with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, I think you said you practiced a Mozart piece every day for a year, and it was slightly unfortunate because when it actually came to the competition, they didn't have that piece. You had to quickly another one, which must have been a bit of a bummer. But that combination of hard practice, is that necessary to then be able to improvise, or do the two go together? Because they seem quite different approaches.
To practice?
Yeah. Do you practice?
If you want to get better, usually it requires practice.
I'll write that down. Thank you. So what drove you to practice that hard? What was the... you're very young, right?
Motivation is if you want to get better.
Yeah, that's true, but most kids don't really necessarily want to get better. What was it about you that you thought, right, I'm locking in on this, I really want to be good? What was the spark? And you were probably, 10 or 11 then, or?
When I first started playing jazz, yeah, I was 11 when I started. But first, I just wanted to learn how to do it. You know, I didn't really know. But actually, I was a pretty fast learner, I think, in the beginning. And by the time I was about 15, then I wanted to learn how to orchestrate. You know, so I thought I could maybe take a Count Basie record and figure out what the orchestration was on a song. And then when I got to college, um, I put together a jazz festival at Grinnell College in Iowa, right? And everybody thought I was crazy. It's a small liberal arts college, and and actually my first major was engineering, you know,
Yes.
because I was asked, "You think you could get a job after you graduate playing jazz?" I didn't know. They said, "You think you could get?" Because I liked technology. I liked technology before I liked music. By the way, when I was a kid, I used to take apart, um, clocks because I wanted to know how the second hand worked. You know, so I would get a screwdriver and take it apart. Still didn't figure it out. Usually just broke it. But I've always been that's part of what I am.
Yeah.
As a real nerd for technology, and I get stuck in there very often. But that was a motivating factor, and so when we did have this jazz festival, which actually was very successful at the school, um, it was right after that performance that I went to my room. And by the way, my first major subject in college was science and electrical engineering. I changed my major to music right after that concert because I looked in the mirror the night after the concert and I said to myself, Herbie, who are you trying to fool? And the next day, I changed it. Still not knowing what the future was going to hold. So far, it's worked out okay.
I think so. I'm going to come back in a bit to nerd Herbie and engineering Herbie because it's fascinating. But we've talked a little bit earlier about at the global stage, the sort of global leadership front, how teamwork and collaboration and listening isn't going so great. But let's talk about where it has worked brilliantly in jazz and in your own career. So you've collaborated widely and been part of some of the great bands and musical teams of our times. So I just wanted to get I know you said earlier that you don't like to say what your favorites are, which is fair enough, but what have been some of the most important collaborations in shaping your career and your music? I mean, obviously, Miles must have been a big influence. And what made him such a big influence and such a great band leader?
I always thought of Miles as being like Zeus, one of the gods.
Right.
So, I mean, I had dreamed of playing with other musicians, but I never dreamed of playing with Miles. That was like way beyond me. And I was living in New York at that time, and I remember that people started saying that Miles was looking for me, and he was asking a lot of musicians about me, and I didn't believe a word of it. And then Donald Byrd said to me, and by the way, Donald Byrd, who really took me under his wing, he's jazz trumpet player, amazing musician, and he's the one that really discovered me and took me from Chicago on the road with him, and then that's when I moved to New York, which was 1961. And anyway, he said, okay, Herbie, when Miles calls, I said, wait a minute, Miles is not going to call. Are you kidding? He said, look, sit down and shut up. When Miles calls, He said, don't tell him you're working with anybody. I said, Donald, come on, man. I would never do this to you. You actually were able to get me my contract with Blue Note Records, and you discovered me. You brought me to New York. You introduced me to musicians. You know, you're the one that actually told me to get my own publishing company and put my tunes in my publishing company, and Watermelon Man was one of the tunes. I said, you've helped me so much. You're the one that encouraged me to look at sports cars, and I bought a AC Cobra, which I still have. And I'm glad I kept it. Anyway, so Donald said, look, Miles is going to call. He says, don't tell him you're working with anybody. So I shut up, right? About 30 minutes later, the phone rings. I said, hello? You working with anybody? You know what I said? No. He said, well, come over to my house tomorrow at 2:30. Click. And he hung up the phone. I didn't know where Miles lived. So I was terrified. Donald Byrd says, I know where he lives. Don't worry, I'll get you there. 30 minutes later, the drummer, Tony Williams, who I had recently met and actually worked with a few times, he called me and he said, did Miles call you? I said, yeah. He said, he called me too. We both said, yeah. So we were both surprised. And the next day, we met at Miles's house. And Ron Carter, the bass player, was there. And George Coleman, the saxophonist, was there. And Miles brought us to his basement where he had his kind of entertainment room. He had a little spinet piano. And there was some music up there. And so we started playing a few things, but Miles played a few notes, and then he stopped, threw his horn on the couch, and he told Ron Carter to take over, to kind of have us go through some songs. I found out later that Miles actually went up to the third floor of his house, and he was listening to us on the intercom. Because he knew that we were terrified. And he wanted to hear us when we were more relaxed.
Wow.
Yeah. And next day, Philly Joe Jones and Gil Evans came by. And Miles, I found out later, he had called them and said, come listen to my new band. Because we were all young guys. Tony was 17 years old. I was 17, I was 21. And, 20, I was 21, 23. Right? And George Coleman was also in his late 20s, I didn't know how old Miles was. I was thinking he was in his 50s, right? And he was actually like 39 years old.
Right.
He wasn't that much older than I was. I didn't find that out until years later.
I was going to ask you if he was intimidating, but I think you answered that. But tell me, what was it then that gave you the sort of, that was such an exceptional band, but then you moved on and kind of went solo, and I guess that was shortly after Speak Like a Child.
Oh, can I say something?
Yep.
You're talking about me being intimidated by Miles. I remember when we played at Lincoln Center in New York. I guess we were the first jazz musicians to play, in one of those facilities. And we started to play the song "My Funny Valentine," and Miles just played an intro to the song, introduction, and then I was supposed to come in with the chords. Just before I came in with the first chord, I heard a different one, a different kind of inversion of this chord. And I had to decide what I was going to play, because Miles didn't know I was going to do this, right? So I was going to do that, and I just prayed that he would hear it. I played this chord. Miles played this note that just perfectly fit.
Wow.
Right. And I'd never really considered that Miles was actually listening to me. I was always kind of following him. I did have an experience prior to that playing at the Village Vanguard with Miles, and I did notice that certain rhythms that Miles played were actually directed but influenced by what Tony Williams was playing. And I would notice sometimes Miles would do something that went up when Ron Carter went down, with his notes on the bass. And then I started to notice certain turns that Miles would make in his playing. I just barely began to realize that he was listening to me, which was a big shock. But this one thing at this Lincoln Center facility was a huge shock, because the chord was very unexpected. But he just nailed it. Right.
I'll come back to some of those anecdotes because they're brilliant, but I did want to move on to technology, because of course collaboration in your career hasn't just been about music. You've collaborated and innovated deeply with technology, changing how music and tech interact. Brian Bell, Quincy Jones, creating effectively new forms of music. And that kind of takes me to the next theme that I think would be good to talk about a little bit, the next phase of technological disruption, and in particular, the inevitable, inescapable AI. Because in addition to the upheavals that we're seeing in global politics, we're seeing a parallel upheaval in technology, especially AI. I see that from my own perspective in news media. There's profound impacts, the potential, the pitfalls. On the one hand, a very powerful tool for research. On the other, the risk of deep fakes and other perils. So this is, of course, a big issue for humanity. Indeed, for some, it's a threat to humanity. I want to hear your take on how we should think about technological development and AI. But first, I just wanted to set the stage a little bit with a clip I found when I was doing my YouTubing. I found it with you and the late, great Quincy Jones. I guess it was back in the 70s, talking about the potential of computing and synthesizers in music. So if we can roll the camera and just go back in time.
It's interesting because these instruments were designed for people to use.
Right.
It's just a tool, another tool. The way an axe is a tool. An axe can be a tool to cut wood to build a house, or it can be a tool to slaughter your neighbor. The same thing. A synthesizer can be a tool to really hurt people's ears or interfere with their lives, or it can be a tool to make a really nice sounding instrument that can really affect people in a positive way. And it all depends on the person that's using them. People blame machines very often for it's the machine's fault. How can it be the machine's fault? We have to plug it in. The machine doesn't do anything but sit there until we plug it in. It doesn't plug itself in. It doesn't program itself yet.
It's on the way, though.
It's on the way.
I love that clip for a lot of reasons. The chemistry of you and Quincy is lovely. But your perspective seems both timely and timeless. And at the end, you nail it when you say computers don't think for themselves or plug themselves in yet. But maybe now they do. So how do you feel about AI? And I guess first in music and creativity, and then whether we should all be really scared. But first of all, music and creativity, is it a good thing? Do you use it? What's its role?
Well, there's two things. It's not going away. It's not disappearing, right? And the second thing is technology doesn't often go backwards. It goes forward. And it's here. It's going to continue. It's something we have to deal with. And it's already smarter than we are, right? So if it's smarter than us, why can't we use it? You know? Yes, there are issues we have to deal with. Jobs, technology, AI will change what those jobs can be. Education, for example, or medicine, doctors, even lawyers, right? Even musicians, right? But, the only thing I can see is get in as early as you can, because you will have an AI assistant to help you. The AI assistant will know what your body needs at all times. It will know what's happening in your body at all times. It will help you with learning. It'll help you with, in my case, with my music. There's so many different aspects of the benefits that you can get from artificial intelligence, and so the world will change, but it's always changed. There were issues when photography started happening. Issues when we started going from covered wagons to trains, and it's always been like that, and it will always continue like that. But as we embrace these new ideas, these new technologies, in primary ways, things will move forward. So you'll be ahead of the curve if you look into it now, instead of waiting till later when it's going to be a lot more difficult.
In some respects, though, AI does seem antithetical to the spirit of jazz, which is about freedom, human connection, not algorithms. So does AI have a place in jazz? Do you use it at all, and how?
Yeah, just recently I signed up for a few things. One is called Notebook LM, and I've been just starting to use that. There's a music writing algorithm program, really, called Dorico, that I use, and it's developing pretty quickly. I've actually had it for quite a few years. So there's so many things that I'll be able to gain from assistance from AI, and I'm personally looking forward to it, and I'm glad I didn't bypass it. So these programs are helping me to understand more about the newer developments of this historical program that I use.
So you talked about some of the key influences in your life in music, collaborations, technology. I wanted to ask you about one more major influence, which is Buddhism. Can you explain a little about how that came to be and how Buddhism has influenced your life and your music?
What came to be?
Buddhism.
Buddhism.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I started practicing Buddhism back in the 70s. That was an experience that I had with the band that we used to call the Mwandishi band, right? Where everybody in the band has these African names that were given to us. You know, mine was...
Yours meant composer, is that right?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't yours composer?
Huh? Composer, it means a composer, right? Mwandishi, right? And so we had this gig playing in up in Seattle, Washington. And we played there. I think we were there for maybe a week or a week and a half in a jazz club. And about the third day, somebody said, "Oh, there's a bunch of parties that are happening tonight." You know, this is way back in the day. You know, everybody's smoking marijuana and other kinds of things. That was that time, right? And and I was young, right? And so they said there's going to be a lot of girls there, right? Cool, right? So everybody in the band went to these parties. There were about 5 different ones, and we stayed up almost all night. By the time we got back to the hotel, we only had 2 hours to sleep before we had to get up and then go to the gig, to play at the club. So everybody was exhausted. And so we went into the club, and I didn't really feel like starting the pace for this job. And so I picked this tune that was called Toys. I forgot it starts with a bass solo, upright bass. And just think about jazz clubs at that time with cheap microphones, and the instrument that you could hear the least was the bass, And so, but it starts with a bass solo. And so the bass player starts to play, and I'm listening to him, and I'm hearing something, and I knew this guy. He had been playing with me for quite some time. I'm hearing some other things coming out of him. Like, where's this coming from? And like, the bass has 4 strings, and I heard like about 3 different things going on. He had some notes going, like this with these 2 fingers, and then these 2 fingers were going like this, while these are going like this, and I'm hearing all this going on. It's like, where's this coming from? And then when the band came in, we actually came in solid. It's because he woke everybody in the band up. And we played this amazing set that everything was just together as one, right? And people ran up to the stage afterwards, and a lot of the people were crying. Oh. They said, "We didn't just hear this music, we experienced this music." I'd never heard anybody say that. And I knew this was because of Buster Williams. He was the bass player. So I took him into the musician's room in the back, and I said, "I heard you were practicing something And if it can make you play bass like that, I want to know what it is. He had been practicing Buddhism. And he had been practicing it, maybe a year. Maybe less than that. I don't remember now how long he had been practicing. But he said that he chanted for a while, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, right? And anyway, he told me about it, and I said, I can't just believe in it just because you told me. I was brought up a Christian, yeah? And he said, oh, you don't have to believe in it. You just try it, it'll work. I said, what? By the way, it does. Anyway, I tried it, and I went to a meeting actually 2 days after that. They had a meeting in Seattle, and I drove up to it. It was an apartment building. I thought it was in somebody's home, and I didn't know the apartment number. And so Buster had told me these words, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and I said, well, I don't know what the apartment number is, and how am I going to find this out? So I started saying, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Somebody came out of the building, right? And then they went back in. And before they closed the door, I opened it. But it was an apartment building. And that was this area where they had the mailboxes, right? And but the inner door was still locked. But I heard something that sounded like bees buzzing, right? And I said, what is that? And I thought, maybe that's where that meeting is. Maybe it's people chanting. I don't know. Anyway, I actually got inside, and it was that apartment that sounded like bees buzzing. And that was when I first started to find out about this practice, and I wound up joining very soon after that.
So I love that story of the path to Buddhism. We've got a small amount of time left. What are the parallels, do you think, between Buddhism and jazz? Because both, in your words, seem to be in the moment. Sort of jazz in the moment and Buddhism in the moment. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah, that captures it pretty well. It is being completely in the moment. Yeah, that's we want to be fully in the moment, because that's where we live, moment to moment.
It's been a pleasure, a great pleasure. There's a saying that you should never meet your heroes. They are wrong. It's been a privilege to spend time with you. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.